As Ken said at the very outset of this evening, we thank you so very much for being here and for making this event, our first live event since 2019, so engaging. We are here as Canadians speaking to Canadians, and we really feel at CCA that we're trying to convene a conversation about the Americas, but also Canada's role in the Americas. And we're very blessed really to have, from the highest levels of government and business, two parties to that discussion that I think need to be had. What I'd like to do is really pick up on comments you made, Nancy, in your remarks, which is really about the moment we're in politically right now in the Americas. And that is a moment where large emerging market countries, like elsewhere in the world, are increasingly becoming geopolitical swing states. They will have more transactional relationships with both East and West, more particularly China and the United States. And that presents a very different geopolitical environment, as the Minister mentioned, in which to operate. And so I guess my question is, how do we ensure that Canada and Canadians and other liberal democratic nations are the ones that are financing the future of the vision that the Minister laid out for the Americas? In other words, how do liberal values drive economic value in the region? Let me start with you, Nancy.
Oh, Jonathan, I am sure that my friend, the Minister, spends many, many nights thinking about this question that you asked. As we speak, Ursula von der Leyen is in Brazil and purposely doing a tour of Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Mexico. And her policy advisor actually commented that they have ignored, for the most part, their attention on the region. And the Chancellor of Germany also just finished a tour of South America. I think we need to be conscious and deliberate about our stance as a country in terms of support. And I believe the Prime Minister demonstrated that in the Three Amigos meeting in Mexico recently. But we need a much bigger presence. We need it from industry and we need it from the body politic as well. We need a much bigger presence. Obviously, Canada and the US are not going to invest the way China invests in the region. However, I believe the body politic needs to champion our industries in Canada to a much higher degree and stand up for the advantages Canadian business brings to the region. I think that is a very important aspect of making sure that we can maintain that balance of power and that the autocratic regimes don't take over that balance.
Thank you, Nancy. So, Minister, the government has recently put a lot of focus on Indo-Pacific for good reason. And one wonders, given Nancy's comments and some of the remarks that were made earlier in the evening, is it a time to elevate an America's strategy in the same manner that we have as a country elevated an Indo-Pacific strategy?
Sure, and obviously, I'd let Minister Joly in that, every foreign minister is focusing on many things. The world is going very fast, as Nancy said. But I think what we did in Asia Pacific is a good blueprint. If I had a dream, I would go in one of these big planes, probably a Bombardier, to do a Team Canada, to kind of reshore that kind of sentiment. When I was foreign minister, I always said, and even before that, just look at the pandemic. I mean, you may know or not, but during the Second World War, Canada, the boat that resupplied all the Caribbeans during the Second World War. And when you look back and you say, there must be more for us to be doing together. I mean, the Caribbean to start with, just if you split kind of the region, you say the Caribbean, that's an obvious place for Canada to be. I mean, historically, the people-to-people tie, the fact that many of us have come from the Commonwealth. I mean, there's so many reasons that this needs to be within, I would say, our sphere of influence and really be really engaged as we have always been historically. Obviously, NAFTA is helping us with our friends in Mexico, but even there, you know, when I was saying it was the first summit on semiconductor, and think about that, if we don't cooperate on semiconductor, what are we going to do together? Because that's the key element of prosperity for the future. I think we have a golden opportunity, if my dream cannot come true as quickly as I wish, is there's one lying nugget there, which is critical mineral. The alternative to the, I mean, we're the only country in the West which has all the critical mineral in Canada. Now, if you couple that with the refining capacity and everything you've already done in many parts of South America, you become a powerhouse. And when you insert yourself, I always say smartly, in the strategic supply chain of energy, you are a player at every table. Because you go back to energy security, food security, and supply chain resilience. If we can play in that, I think that we could do a great service. But like I said, my dream would be to take a big plane and to make sure that we do this team camp, just like, you know, the president is doing, because I think our friends there are wanting us to be more present. It reminds me, it's like in Washington. You never go too often in Washington because everyone goes and you're there for an hour and then something else comes up. But I think if you think about South America in particular, I mean, some of the countries are integrated with us to the TPP. Thanks God, this was probably one of the most consequential decisions you mentioned about China. I remember a former deputy minister, which I will name one day in the book, said, "Minister, of all the decisions that have been taken by the government, thanks God that you pushed for the CPTPP, because just think about what it did for the Asia-Pacific region, although we have Peru and Chile, which are part of the TPP. But I think these trade agreements are enabling, but what we need to do, and Nancy and I, maybe it's going to be part of our mission, is to bring all the SMEs to realize the potential. Because demography is destiny. As a country of 38 million people, you have to look beyond that. And as the country in the world, the only G7 who has a free trade with all the other G7, think about the opportunities also for these countries in clean technology, in hydrogen, in critical minerals. But you're quite right, and I'll stop there, that if we don't do it, there's others who are going to take our place.
Right.
And I think that's why when I say challenges and big opportunities, I always look on the bright side and I say that's a huge opportunity, but we need to scale, we need to do it quickly, and we need to do it permanently.
Thank you. There's competition of all kinds. So we live in the era of the IRA, which is, created.
Tell Stellantis.
Yes. Yeah. No.
No, it was an inside joke for Stellantis. There's nobody of Stellantis in the room.
But it is a monumental piece of legislation, probably more important than the Highways Act of 1956. So it is creating a sucking sound of investment and focus from Europe, from Canada, and from the rest of the world. I guess the question is, how do we ensure, based on a vision of the economic future for the Americas, that what could be a made in America scenario becomes a made in the Americas scenario? What are the steps, Minister, to make a vision that is responsive to that challenge? Or,
Do you want to go
whomever wants to go first.
I'm your +1 tonight, so you go first.
Nancy, please go first. And I also say, because I think it's particularly relevant to your company and to your work, is how do you then select the partners? How do you select the CapEx decisions that are made, given that there is this reality that they're underwriting a transition in energy, and it's a very big checkbook?
It's a very big checkbook, Jonathan, you're absolutely right. And it is attracting tremendous investment and tremendous excitement and engagement in the US marketplace. And with all due respect to my friend, and the most wonderful minister over these past umpteen years, almost a decade, we talk a lot about doing things. We're not very good at actually getting them started. Critical minerals, we've talked
You
about.
can applaud.
Critical minerals, we know we have aplenty. Countries all over the world would give their eye teeth to be Canada. But I was talking to a friend of mine tonight. 3, possibly 4 years to get permit and license for a lithium mine in the United States. 10 to 15 years for permit and license for a mine in Canada. We have to sort this out. We have to get our house in order at home. We have so much regulatory complexity that doesn't, even if we had the IRA, and actually my compliments to the government for a terrific budget to incent the energy transition and all kinds of new opportunities. It's terrific, but we still have to sort out the regulatory complexity. And the regulators need to have mandates to actually move towards a cleaner future. Having said that, if we can do that at home, my feeling is what's happening is a lot of Canadian industries are saying we've had to do it at home. We're really good at it, perhaps the best in the world, if not the best in the world, in resource development and energy innovation. So we're going elsewhere. But as I said in my comments, business is the arbiter for diplomacy. If we go together, if we come up with a strategy together to invest, champion, and demonstrate to the governments of the region that we are here and we're here to stay, we are going to be a worthy partner in the future, and we are much stronger together. It's a great message.
Totally.
But we have to demonstrate the commitment.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, sure. Nancy is right, as always. And even her husband is smiling. But I would say one thing, in the world of our way, Canada wins. And I'll tell you something that for me, when I go to Washington, I always say, you know, in the world of the IRA and the CHIPS Act, I always say to my American friend, if you all assume that the underlying principle is resiliency, Canada has to be part of the equation for the United States to be resilient. And in that sense, I can tell you a number of examples. Recently, just look at Volkswagen. And I was at the forefront of that. By the way, in the book, that started with one phone call. And a year after, we got the first gigafactory of Volkswagen outside of Germany. And we were competing with the world, and we won it in St. Thomas. And I'll tell you why we won. Yesterday, the CEO of Rio Tinto, Jakob Swalsam, was with me in Saguenay. The first smelter to be open in the Western world in 12 years, the last one was in Iceland, is going to be open in Saguenay in Quebec. That's going to be the largest, I think we can say to Canada, that's going to be the greenest smelter. And Saguenay, not my words, his word to Reuters, is going to be the largest production site of aluminum in the Western world. That's Canada of the 21st century. And in that world, I would say we win. We win for 5 reasons. And Nancy is right that we need to do better. There's no doubt about that. But if you look at, for example, BHP, they decided to put their potash mine to double down on Canada. And tomorrow, Nancy and I are going to host the board of Dow Chemical, which when I called Jim in Midland, I said, Jim, you need to have your board meeting because they have a huge project in Fort Saskatchewan. He said, Minister, anytime, I'll bring the whole board in Canada because we want to double down our investment in Canada. So my perspective is always when you talk to global CEOs, you know, I go back to my thing, stability, predictability, and the rule of law, and looking at the world where people can invest. Obviously, we look fairly attractive, but we can never win on the money. And I'm so happy there's banker and pension fund folks and people who would understand me when I say that, because I can never outcompete the United States. We're Canada. We're not the reserve currency of the world. 5 things that brings people to Canada. Talent. We're still the biggest magnet for talent. And I would say our immigration policy is making a huge difference to make sure we can bring people. The second thing I would say, the ecosystem. Find me a country in the world which has an aerospace industry, a biomanufacturing industry, a battery industry, a car industry, and a defense industry to come. You know, we're not, I always say, we're not like an Australian of the Nord version. We're a small version of the United States. You know, we're the third largest manufacturer of cars if you take the Windsor-Detroit corridor in the world. Montreal is the third largest city in the world to manufacture a plane. Then you look at the third thing is around critical minerals, and proximity is everything. And that's why I want to work with our colleagues around the region, because if you talk to all the CEOs of the automaker, they say proximity. Proximity to resources, markets, and assembly line. That's why we can win as a region. I love my dear friends in other parts of the world, but they're too far from the markets. People make their money in the United States, at least for those, if you look at the auto industry and in Europe. And you could say China as well, but that's a different market. The fourth thing is renewable energy, and Nancy is a leader in that. People come here because they understand that we're going to move from electric car to a green car. And that has been my pitch. We're going to do green steel, green aluminum. I'm working on green plastics. We'll do green semiconductors. And that's how you can win, because the whole industry is going there. And lastly is access to market. And I think the fact that we have these trade agreements, when you talk to CFOs in the world, because I'm negotiating with many of them, if you put your plant in Canada, and assuming you're in the battery auto sector, you probably save 10% on import duties for machinery from Europe. These folks understand that. So I would say in a world of that, we need to prevent a race to the bottom. But as long as we're pari passu with the United States on subsidies, we win because of our people. We win because of our critical minerals. We win because we're Canada.
Can do.
Exactly, the can-do. The can-do is a great example of which we need to do more together. Indeed. But this is the world, I think, where we need to seize. But I'll finish there, but that's why we need people like you. And you, Ken, I'm looking particularly because you're just in front of me. And I don't have glasses. Not everyone in the world wakes up to think about Canada. That's the one thing that I've learned in this job. We think we're big. But you go around the world, and I must say, when people in Tokyo and in Seoul talk to me about St. Thomas or Bécancour in Quebec, I know we're winning.
Great. You alluded to a race to the bottom, and we all want to avoid that. And so we, in this country, and now with renewed vigor in the United States post-Trump, hopefully not pre-Trump, we've seen a huge effort to move to renewables to essentially address the climate change challenge. There are some who say that the resiliency that you're talking about is actually being eroded in our energy system, that it's become increasingly fragile as a result of this very, very top-down process, which I guess when you're facing existential issues, politicians and policymakers need to get involved. But it's the first energy transition we've had on the planet, which has come from the top down and not from the bottom up, as was the 50s or 60s from coal to oil, for example. So it's going to be a bit jangly. I wonder, can you tell us a little bit about how this affects, Nancy, the way you think about your business? Because if the critics are right, there is an accident to happen. How do we avoid that?
I think we saw the beginnings of the accident occur as Russia invaded the Ukraine. Mm-hmm. There needs to be very deliberate, well thought out planning with energy transition, in my opinion. We have to take into consideration affordability. This is a huge transformation. It is a full capital stock turnover. And we have a lot of very good recent assets that are in the ground in all of our provinces and around the world that really somebody is going to have to pay for. And they could possibly be stranded. So I think we have to really think about that piece of the equation that hasn't been talked about. The other thing that we need to take into consideration is reliability. Wind doesn't always blow and sun doesn't always shine. In my own province, for example, in the month of December 2022, just a few months ago, 3 weeks we had greater than minus 20 degrees C for 3 weeks straight. The grid in Alberta is 15 gigawatts.
Yep.
Our peak capacity, our peak load was 12 gigawatts. For home heating, just for home heating and commercial residential use, we use the equivalent of 50 gigawatts of natural gas. Now, to replace that in the next 12 years, as is contemplated by the Clean Electricity Regulation, is not only next to impossible, it is feasibly unaffordable for the constituents in Alberta. Saskatchewan has much the same issue. And I know that Ontario here has a supply shortage. As you see all of the extraordinary development and investment, as you talked about the batteries, the auto corridor, the demand for electricity is increasing.
Yeah.
We can't build hydro anymore. We must build nuclear, but really there's no silver bullet.
Yeah, we can apply.
There's no silver bullet. We have to take into consideration all of the technologies, all of the innovation, and we have to have backup supply. As Europe quickly noticed, as soon as Russia cut off the gas supply, they were pretty much hooped and are now searching the world for backup energy that looks like fossil fuels to support the renewables and the other technologies. And I think it's really important for all of us to remember. Our climate goal of 2050 is net zero. Net means a plus and a minus.
True.
And you can't get zero. We have to be able to balance, and there has to be extraordinarily deep, honest, transparent dialogue amongst in the financial sector, the body politic, and industry about how we get there in an affordable, pragmatic fashion to achieve 2050. And if we don't, we are going to have supply shortages, blackouts, grid alerts, and a very, very costly economic input that is key to all economic development. If electricity isn't affordable, it is the #1 input in all manufacturing. All of the new technologies that we want to develop, we have to be very deliberate and conscious about how we go about this transition.
Thanks, Nancy. Thank you. Now, there is a question from the floor.
Sure.
And I want to call upon Mauricio Celaya from there you are, EY. Please, go right ahead.
Thank you so much. So considering the geopolitical climate that we're in and also the transition towards net zero, we're now seeing that Canada is emerging as a potential global leader in critical minerals. The question I have for you is, do we have a strategy to be able to build a more robust and resilient supply chain? And also, what could we do to potentially future-proof Canada's global position in critical minerals, given the macro environment that we have today? Thank you.
Thank you, Mauricio.
Yeah, I'd say yes. First, let me just come back to what Nancy was saying, and I think always Nancy is clear-eyed as to the challenges and the opportunities. I would agree with you that electricity is key for our prosperity. As we speak, there's some project we have to say no to. Because, believe it or not, and I wish the Globe and Mail sometimes was with me when I negotiate, but not all the time. But the first question they ask me is not about subsidy. The first question people ask is, do you have the block of electricity? Because believe it or not, what you've seen recently, my phone is burning out of people who want to come to Canada. Because they all understand. By the way, if it's good for Volkswagen, trust me, it's good for about every CEO in the world. If they did a year of due diligence, the Germans, trust me, everyone said that must be good. And everyone, and everyone wants to come. Now we need to manage, but to your point, and I'll come to the question of the gem, I think Nancy is right. I mean, case at point, I mean, the largest hydrogen plant in North America will be in Edmonton with Air Products that we brought Safi to invest with you. Exactly.
Yes.
You're right. You're right.
Their products is half the size, and they're U.S., Francois.
I know. Well, you see, it's going to be great tomorrow evening when we're going to have this panel with Dow Chemical. We may have to. No, but it's great that we have the first hydrogen plant, I would say the largest in North America, will be in Edmonton. And I think other opportunities we were talking before around small modular reactor, which is also on the nuclear side where we can do, and certainly we have to look, because Canada, if you look on the nuclear side, for example, has a huge reputation around the world. I mean, we just came from Korea, for example, in the CANDU reactor, and even in Eastern Europe. So how can we do that also in the hemisphere? But to your question, sir, I come from a place called Shawinigan. That might not be some place you know. It's a small place. But at that time, my grandfather was cutting logs that we were putting on a river to sell to the United States. I think as a generation, we decided to be smarter in the sense that we just don't want to dig. We want to refine and create the largest value in Canada for you and future generation, because the easiest thing would be just make sure that we start digging and we ship it. But we want to refine, we want to build the batteries, we want to build the cars. That's, I think, the smart thing we do. What we need now is speed and scale. And I'll tell you from my perspective, there's a lot of resources, but to go back to your question, it's the first time, I think, at least that I've seen in my lifetime, that you have two industries that need to work together that never really work together. You have the auto industry and the mining industry. And we've been in the middle of that, because I know CEOs on both sides who call me. One wants long-term supply agreement for 20 years, the other would prefer spot market prices. And they call me to complain about each other. They say it's so unreasonable. And what we've been trying to do, and that's why you've seen like Rio Tinto yesterday, not only we did that, but we signed a 10-year MOU because they want not to double down on Canada, they want to triple down in Canada. That's why we're talking to some of the largest mining group in the world to say, how can you help us to make sure that we have speed and scale, that we have scattered resources around there, but if you want to meet the market demand, because when you're dealing with the auto sector, it's quite a special industry. The volumes you need are so big that we're trying to make sure that we use that to make sure that we can develop these resources. And as Nancy said, we need to get better on the permitting side. But one thing that the miners tell me, and I take it from their CEOs, they said, in Canada it's a bit slower, but in the US I get sued every day. So they said, you know, on balance sometimes, they said, you know, so that being said, we need to do far better, because this is a generational opportunity, not only for Canada. I want to go back to the purpose of where we are, but I think if the region was aligned in terms of being the supplier of choice to the world, at a time where people are trying to diversify their source of supply to meet the market demand of the 21st century. And people have assets in both Canada and Chile and Peru and Argentina. How can we do that better continentally? That I think would be a huge win, and I think would inspire the young generation, because they'd see a future in themselves in the economy of the 21st century.
Nancy, I'm going to give you the last word.
No, tonight I was speaking with a young woman who is Canadian, but from Latin America, and as many of you are here today, and my good friends Hector and Pierre. I think we as industry leaders, what I would like to say is we have much of a diverse population in our businesses today, thanks to good immigration policy and attracting talent in Canada. We need to utilize these talented people better. We need to make sure that we're listening. They bring with them the knowledge of the culture, the boots on the ground. And oftentimes we overlook the value that they can add to our projects when we're looking to invest in Latin America. So I encourage all of my colleague business leaders here to really embrace the diversity that we have represented in our businesses today and take advantage of their tremendous talent.
Thank you. Nancy. Yes. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Again, thank you to our Gala sponsors, our annual premium members. Again, open invitation to join with what we're doing. Thank you. We will hope to see you again next year.
Thank you, everyone. Merci. Now, everyone.
Yeah. I think we'll do a picture.
Thank you.